who's our design coordinator, and also 4 of our current students, Bing, Pranagita, Natalie, and Vanessa. And they're all going to be here to answer your questions, should you have any, once I've given you a bit of an overview of the program. So let's get right into it. And I'm excited that you're all here and have an interest in joining us on our program. So first, Design for Performance and Interaction is a master's program based at the Bartlett School of Architecture. The Bartlett has currently 4 sites across London, and we're situated in one of these sites, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is the central campus that UCL is on, and you can see highlighted kind of key places in this. So this is where the main Bartlett building is situated. This is the main campus. And then this is the main Bartlett building at 22 Gordon Street. That's not where we're based, but we have activities that take place there. Like right now, we're building the graduation show for the students that have joined us today. So in this space, in the kind of foyer area, that's where the final graduation show takes place. But then we also have the new East campuses, and there's 2 highlighted in yellow, UCL East, which has just opened, and then UCL at Here East, and that's where Design for Performance and Interaction is located. So that, if you join the program, would be your home for 15 months. So this is it, nice aerial view. It's situated in the Olympic Park, where, as the name suggests, the Olympic Games took place, and this was actually the building that it says Here East on it. It was one of the press centers, and it's now being converted into a number of different uses, one of which is a space that UCL occupies, and it goes across a number of different faculties. And the Bartlett Department for Architecture is one of the inhabitants for this space. So this is us, the big orange bee, not for Bartlett, it's a complete coincidence, but we quite enjoy it because it makes us really visible that we're the Bartlett at Here East. So I'll show you a brief video of the space as it was and the way that it's been transformed for us to take up residence in there and do all the exciting work that our students and staff collaborate on. You can see completely empty space, and then it was transformed to now house large-scale workshop facilities that are accessible to students, but also facilitate a number of research projects that are generally collaborative across faculties, but also integrate industry in really, really interesting, provocative and radical ways, and challenging the way that work is undertaken in the 21st century. We also have here, as you can see, a large auditorium, and then studio space that the students sit in to do their work. And Bing, who's one of the students who's with us, she's actually in the studio space. So once I finish talking, you can actually get a glimpse in her background of what a DFBI studio space looks like, the space that students undertake most of their work in, and where we meet on a regular basis. So let's get right into it. Design for Performance and Interaction. So we're not a program that takes place completely behind academic walls, so the academic walls that I just showed you, but one of the key things is we do work out in the world, and you'll see this in a number of the slides that I've put together, is that we don't just do paper projects, but we build at the full scale, whether the full scale be a physical scale of a one-to-one installation piece, whether it be virtual environments that we're mocking up to actually allow for larger scales that the work reflects. And we show work here at Tate Britain in 2019. This was just before the world went into lockdown. We had this amazing opportunity where students were sharing their work in one evening at the Tate Britain. Lots of visitors came. This work wasn't completely finished at that place at that point in time. So there was still feedback that came from audience members, from members of the public, from invited industry guests that then would inform the final push towards the students completing their work. And indeed, that's one of the things that's really, really important, is not just to finish the work, put it out there and exhibit it, but constantly install moments throughout the academic year where students get feedback by putting their work out into the world and then reflecting on that and updating where they are in interaction with the very users that we're designing for. So context. So DFPI didn't come out of nothing. We've got a long history of different things that have happened to then lead to the formation of this master's program. And I'm not going to give you a complete history lesson, but I'm going to touch on a few interesting nuggets of things that are relevant to us and things that might become relevant to you if you were to join the program. So you can see here, there's a bunch of theory references, also some design work, just to say, yeah, we do a lot of reading, and that can be fun, but it can also be, hard work. And the students might, have a few things to say about that if you've got questions for them. But it's really, really important to not just kind of focus on design as such, but really thinking about the wider context that design emerges in, the thinking that underlies design, but also the thinking that people in other disciplines, in adjacent disciplines do, that can inform the design work that we're doing. And then in turn, the design work that our students and our staff do informs the stuff that theoreticians and other people in the world might write about. So one of the things on DFPI is that if you look at the work, there is an element of popular culture to it. Popular culture, of course, something that in science fiction novels we're well used to, having these kind of futuristic landscapes scaped out, like two examples here, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, Neuromancer, William Gibson. Both of these are known for example, coining words like cyberspace or the matrix in the case of Neuromancer, where the world was imagined to blend between the physical and the digital at a time when that wasn't the actual reality yet. And William Gibson kind of foresaw that and wrote a novel about it. Similarly, Neil Stephenson coined the word metaverse, which we're really used to right now, and it's an actual reality in the world that we inhabit. So often science fiction is this kind of precursor to what's going to be happening. Or even earlier, this is kind of around about the 1970s, 80s, even earlier, beginning of the 20th century, The Machine Stops by Ian Forster in 1909, where he had this vision of an interconnected world where people would no longer physically interact with each other, but they'd all be inhabiting these kind of little hexagonal pods, and they'd be connected via what he coined as the machine. And then the machine stops. It's a short story. If anyone's interested in reading it, I can highly recommend it. It's actually really provocative to think that this was written more than 100 years ago. And it's really reflective of a lot of what we've been going through in recent years. And so, yes, DFPI does have grounding in these kind of future visions. And indeed, our students invent future visions and then make design projects around them, be they speculative work, be they work where there's kind of via one object, a future vision is presented and then debated. But it's not just popular culture. We're also an academic discipline, and so we come out of a lot of academic thinking. For example, the field of cybernetics, which is an academic discipline where technology, science were intertwined, and it was really the study of machines, the study of systems of machines and humans. This is Norbert Wiener, one of the founders of, probably say, one of the really early and key figures of cybernetics. Cybernetics, the science or study of control or regulation mechanisms in human machine systems, including computers. And so this is also one of the reasons why cyber is now embedded in everyday language, this field of cybernetics that really wanted to link up different disciplines and not just think about things in a discipline specific way, but transcend this idea of kind of concrete, things like the cognitive sciences. Here we've got technology studies or even architecture, but actually think about this overall system and how these disciplines, but also what the disciplines concerned themselves with, would come together to solve and provoke really, really interesting discourse, or solve questions, provoke discourse. And in a contemporary context, one of the examples you can give that cybernetics was already thinking about things like artificial intelligence, understanding our own understanding of the world, and then building machine systems that might reflect the way that we as humans think, and then would become our counterpart. Now more relevant than ever with recent developments, how we're starting to think about the way that artificial intelligence systems might start collaborating, working with us, and how we integrate them into our everyday life, and into our everyday life also as designers that are doing relevant work like the stuff that we do on DFPI. In terms of architecture, we are an architecture school, and indeed a lot of our students have backgrounds in architecture, not all of them, but quite a few. And if we take cybernetics as an example, there was always a really intimate relationship with architecture. Architecture, of course, you could understand it as the design of worlds. We do the built environment, now also virtual environments, architecturally designed. And thinking about cybernetics in that context allows you to understand architecture as a system that is composed of many, many different elements. Yes, humans built structures, but also actuated systems and how they all come together and work to kind of form one ecosystem. This is a very famous conceptual idea by Cedric Price, the architect, the Fun Palace, a learning environment. It was never realized to the full extent that he had envisioned, but there were bits picked up, and there's architectures around the world where you can see the influence that Cedric Price had it. For example, the Pompidou Center, famous museum in Paris. Other architects also roughly around about that time, maybe a little bit later, people like Archigram, imagining these walking cities that would interact with their inhabitants, and they wouldn't be completely static and just enable interaction of humans in the space, but actually the built environment would become an active participant together with its human inhabitants. Archigram also imagined architectures at a much, much smaller scale, the scale of the body, something that's really relevant to us on the program. A lot of our students do body-based work in a number of different ways. For example, designing wearables. Here you see two of Archigram's inventions, the cushicle and the soutalon, that really saw the body as a site for architectural intervention, creating these spaces that were of a more intimate nature and that were very kind of individualized, but in some way did enable interaction across different participants. Other architects like Walter Pichler, so Archigram British, Walter Pichler Central European, was already imagining these futuristic devices, the TV helmet, where you kind of be locked into your own little world. There's a screen there with and you could access other worlds through viewing this screen, but importantly, the way you also see it depicted and captured here, always within a spatial context. So the way that you'd inhabit space would also influence possibly, how you'd sit, how you'd stand, as you would be watching films, watching some kind of content that would be presented on these screens. And now again, think of a contemporary context. We're still strapping devices to our heads to access and interact with other virtual worlds. Now they're slightly different from what Walter Pichler might have imagined back then, but we can definitely see an evolution of these devices. Some architects, a little bit later, here Diller and Scofidio, who some of you might be familiar with because they build actual architecture buildings. If you've been to New York, they have famous structures that are there. But they were already thinking also about the body as a site for architectural intervention and often placed into a performance context. So designing these structures around and for the body that could then be performed that would in some way inhibit the way that the body moves, but also allow new and different types of body movement to be undertaken in relation to the structure and then also in relation to the space, a performance space that this would be situated in. They weren't the first, of course. If we again travel back through history a little bit, some of you might be familiar with the Bauhaus movement. Generally in architectural kind of circles, Bauhaus is always something that's seen as, yes, they did buildings. They were at the kind of, the inception of modernism. A lot of that can be traced to the Bauhaus, but the Bauhaus was already a kind of a pretty radical movement where people from lots and lots of different disciplines would come together and invent all sorts of new ways designing, all sorts of new devices and things. Here we see work by Oskar Schlemmer in the world of dance and choreography, where again, similar to some of the stuff that I've just shown, the body was a site for these structures that would be situated and then be used in a performance context. And some of them quite comical, but also given that this was early 20th century, you can already see how groundbreaking they might have been then. And even now, they're still pretty provocative and radical. And indeed, the work that Oskar Schlemmer started is still performed in a contemporary context. So we still have performance work undertaken where these kind of costumes, these body-based architectures would be worn by performers as they're engaging, for example, in a dance performance here, ballet. It's also taken into a virtual realm. So this was with the Bauhaus 100-year celebration just a few years ago. 2019, which was the year that we also participated in Bauhaus Recorded at the Tate Britain. There was this virtual reality piece, Das Totale Tanztheater, which was something that the Bauhaus envisioned, but because of kind of limitations of building technology back then, it was never fully realized. And so this was now built in as a virtual reality environment, kind of tapping into new technologies to realize visions that at the time were paper projects, but now we could actually build them at the full scale and emerge and kind of immerse ourselves into these new digital virtual worlds. In a contemporary context, these virtual spaces here, you might be familiar with things like this. So these are promotional videos where kind of the commercial world is picking up on this and thinking, well, what might be the potentials to have virtual and often augmented reality environments overlaid or kind of embedded into our physical worlds? What are the potentials for this? How might this change everyday life? And so we're all fairly accustomed to seeing promotional videos like this of kind of imaginations of the future. And while they sometimes can be, quite fun to look at, and there are certain elements of them where you go, that is something that I think would make our own life enriched, a really interesting thing. We can also take a critical view of movements that are happening here. And that's something that's really central to our program, is not just to kind of go, we're here to service commercial views and commercial ideas, but also to critically interrogate them and think, well, are these things that we want to buy into? In what way specifically? What might that mean for people, for diverse user communities in the world? And how might we design this in a different way? So speculating on the status quo and where we would like to travel, where we would like to go. For example, in a performance context. So this is one of our members of staff, Alex Whitley, who's worked with another member of staff, George Adamopoulos. There are two companies here collaborating on a performance that brings together a range of different media to imagine this physical kind of virtual environment inhabited by bodies in a range of different movement activities. A bit of a jump now. When we're talking about bodies, we're not just talking about human bodies, of course. When I was talking about cybernetics, we're talking about machines. So here now, contemporary context, you'll all be familiar with this, Boston Dynamics, developing these terrestrial robots that can move in sometimes eerily human-like way, and they're getting better by the day in the way that they might move. Crucial bit here, and I think that that brings us back to why why in an architecture school we might be doing this. If you observe not just the robots themselves, but also the specific space that they've been placed in, kind of configuration of the boxes, the environment, and then see how, based on that built environment, the way the robots are moving, what it affords them, the kind of movements, and how their movements are really being shaped by the physical structure that's there. And in turn, how movements that these robots might want to undertake or humans might want to undertake, shaped by the built structure around them. And again, something that members of our staff, for example, one of our staff members, Dominic, who works for Jason Bruges' studio, thinking about how we might use robots here, kind of commercial robots that you'll see from kind of fabrication and manufacture environments, how we might take these into an artistic context and think about them becoming agents that kind of leave these traces in space, marking out these kind of patterns in sand, and how human observation meets the way that these robots are interacting again and again. This was exhibited at the Olympics in Japan just a few years ago, also at the height of lockdown. So we've got a bit of lockdown kind of that we're working through, but now we're coming out of this. And student work. So I've talked a little bit about some of the very brief, some of the things that inform us, some of the things that are interesting for us, but it's by far not the whole picture. There's a world of other things out there that we engage in, and indeed we encourage our students to also kind of find and contextualize their work in ways that is relevant to them and their interest. So it's not just what I've just showed you, but a lot of other things come into, but it was kind of beyond the scope of a quick introduction here. So what's the work that our students do to engage with? I'm going to show you a few videos, some from previous years and then some from the students that are currently with us on this call, just to give a bit of a taste of how students respond to the kind of challenges and the questions that the world and that we set them, they respond to. So performance, it's in the name. So a lot of our students do performance. design performances, design the environments for performances, and then questions and challenge new types of performance. So participatory performance, where you as the audience member become the performer and interact with another performer. In this case, this was last year's work. So thinking not just about the kind of technologies that might enable new types of participatory performance, but also the way the space is set up and conceptually the world that this is situated in. We've got performance that is, you can kind of somehow frame it as reflexive performance, where an environment is created that then allows a dancer to actually kind of tap into their inner world and engage with the way that they might feel, with things that are going on with themselves, that then are reflected based on their movements into the world that they're situated in, which again would inform the way that they move. So they're kind of constructing this really sophisticated feedback loop between environment and themselves on this journey of kind of finding something within themselves. Yes, there's an audience watching, but it is a reflexive performance that is very much there for the dancer rather than just for the enjoyment or the kind of, takeaway message for an audience member. So the dancer not just there to service others, but crucially centers around the dancer and what they're taking away from this experience. Other students bring together performance with virtual reality environments and wearable technologies. So this is something, this was a piece again from last year that engaged with questions of identity and kind of finding of yourself in a kind of wider world. So identity and belonging situated in the kind of the world of the ballroom. And the students designed this kind of rather engaging piece, but actually underlying it were some really kind of big questions about belonging and how you might identify as part of a certain community, how you find that, and how you through this also find who you are and kind of feel that you have found the space that you want to be in. Some of the students engage with popular culture and new questions of interpersonal interaction and relationships. So this work, again, from last year, was one that looked at kind of Chinese idol culture and designed this world that reflected really on the kind of interpersonal relationships that will be formed between people that don't actually know each other, but they are entangled via social media platforms, via images that are projected of them, and the way that that might be received by others, to kind of build this really, really deep and actually quite meaningful thing that does have popular culture and a very engaging and kind of playful approach to a pretty serious question. Other type of performance work, and you can see that it's never kind of a pure performance, but it's always enabled and supported by technologies that become an active participant in all of this. So this work, this was really early DFPI work, looking at aesthetics and challenging this idea that aesthetics are always purely visual. Yes, for us as viewers, we look at this, and for probably quite a few of us, we find this visually aesthetically pleasing. If you can hear the audio, you can also hear very, very slightly these beads that are embedded in the dancer's wearable that give you also an auditory aesthetic appreciation. But for the dancer herself, the kind of core aesthetics are the aesthetics of movement that this setup enables, known as soma aesthetics, to really think about a wider sensorium. So not just the visual, but also how other senses have an aesthetic dimension to them. Other things that we do, thinking about human and machines, how they might relate to each other, form kinship relationships. Or machines that are kind of used in order to reflect about our own systems, our own human systems. Here, thinking about politics and political human systems, a machine that then kind of mirrors this back to us as a kind of a rally for political action, reflecting on power systems, power structures, and how the dynamics of these kind of play out, allowing us to kind of visualize, externalize the way that we as humans interact with each other, the systems we put into place, and allow us maybe to get some deeper understanding of the world that we're entangled in. Other students, again, looking at questions of diversity, equity, inclusion, doing this in a pretty radical, provocative way, really thinking about what kind of spaces might be created that allow everyone to be the way that they want to be, rather than the way that society might want them to conform to be. And so you can see with work like this, it's provocative. It wants you to kind of go, oh, what's this? I'm intrigued. I don't completely understand it. But it is something, you engage with it over time, and you kind of start understanding the core message of everyone is welcome, everyone is different. What kind of spaces can we now imagine using the virtual, using the physical, to really open up and allow everyone to be, and allow everyone to kind of unfold in their identity, rather than in a kind of homogenized identity that's imposed from the outside. And finally, some of our students also go on, quite a few of them, to undertake doctoral studies. So this is a piece by Ava Agakuchak, who's now also one of our members of staff, teaching theory. This is some of her early doctoral work, where she was working in the realm of wearables and performances. Just a kind of brief glimpse of doctoral work undertaken by our students. So all of this, of course, doesn't come out of nowhere. So we've got an infrastructure to support this. So people arrive on DFPI often with a range of different ideas of what they might want to pursue. And indeed, a lot of them follow that through, but sometimes there's moments of discovery because there's a lot of space for exploration and kind of really defining what you as a student would like to achieve, the trajectory that you are already on, the trajectory you'd like to define for yourself, then going forward into, yes, perhaps doctoral studies, or taking up a position in industry, and kind of pushing the boundaries, challenging the type of work that we see now and evolving it for the future. So we've got a range of people working on the program, kind of brief overview, obviously not going to go into everyone into detail, but just to say we have different strands. We have kind of design strand, we have a skills strand where students learn an awful lot of software that then enables them to actually build and make the work at full scale that we're doing. And we've got a theory component where we do some deep thinking and students do a lot of writing to get a handle on the ideas that they're working with, and that informs their design work, but equally design work as something that then can inform the way that you're thinking about things in a theoretical framework. So in terms of the people that teach design, we've got people who are kind of pure design tutors that work in tutor groups. And then we've got design technology tutors that are there to support you in a range of different ways. So some of these are very much on kind of hardware end of things, working on things like mechatronics, engineering. Some of them are software specialists. We have people that work on kind of performance space technology, so light, sound. We've got people that teach technology as in the technology of how bodies might move in space. So a range of different people that are there to support your design work and kind of the making of the ideas that you have that you would like to then share with the world. So these are the theory tutors, the ones that do an awful lot of the kind of the thinking, reading, writing with you, which not many people come to the program to do this, but I will say that quite a few might leave going, this wasn't so bad, this was actually really interesting to kind of start thinking about it in a completely different framework and seeing how design and theory might relate to each other. And yes, technology tutors that are also teaching things like the kind of skills packages, not just in the design studio context, but also in dedicated classes. In terms of the timetable, it's also something that you can find online. So we have 15 months. So basically what it means is we have 5 terms. Term 4 is the summer term. So it's a bit of a quieter one. We don't stop completely because, you know, we go through right till the end, but this is the way that the program is broken up. So we have the 3 strands: design, theory, and skills. And you can see here how design goes over the entirety of the 15 months in 3 modules. Well, first we do some quick workshops. Then in an initial project, students start defining what it is that they might want to work on, to then in their final project from April right up until this December kind of realize that, and that goes up then in the graduation show and is shared with everyone who might be interested. Theory, we do a bit of theory at the beginning, then there's a bit of break while students are kind of finding their own interest field in the initial projects stage. And then when it gets to final projects, that when we come in and we write a thesis report. Thesis in the kind of world of design is the word that we often use for what elsewhere might be seen as a dissertation. So students write basically their dissertation in relation to their design work. And then skills, term 1, term 2 are really there to kind of give you the necessary tools and the understanding of the tools that you need to make all of this stuff happen. I've mentioned this, design and theory closely interlinked. And so we often have sessions where, you know, we have kind of little mock-up conferences or kind of roundtable conversations where students might be sharing what they're doing, and we kind of critically reflect on a range of different thematics, do some kind of strange, weird, and wonderful little exercises with students where we're kind of thinking and kind of listening within ourselves rather than always having to be active. Sometimes kind of moments of rest, moments of pause can be really, really important to digest and kind of work through on some unconscious, subconscious, non-conscious level, everything that you're taking in your everyday student life. Workshops are organized, so a range of different ones. They might be skills workshops, so you kind of might have an additional thing like touch designer that you're learning. You might do a movement workshop. Here we have a movement workshop where we're also tapping into kind of strange kind of robotic wearable devices that Alex, one of our tutors, ran with students a few years ago. We do exhibits, so exhibitions, project fairs out in public. I mentioned this at the beginning, that it's not just about finishing a project within kind of the academic space, but actually finding opportunities for students to show their work to a wider public and get lots and lots of feedback from a range of different people, whether it be that 6-year-old child or that 73-year-old person that just happened to wander in, who actually in her day doesn't have anything to do with the kind of world that we're engaged in, or whether it be industry specialists that again take a very different view on the work that you're doing. And all these different perspectives come in to inform the work. So this is a range of them. This is an image just of this this past September when we went to Ars Electronica and students exhibited fragments of their work together with a video installation. These are the students that are in the call with us today. We also do field trips, again, current students doing some fun activities in an alpine landscape. We went and we spent a few days in a monastery. I said earlier, a bit of rest can sometimes be quite good. So I think there was a moment of pause there with some meditation, some resting, but also some hiking and just getting away from the kind of all the tech that we work with all the time and going into kind of a more natural environment as a complete counterpoint to everything. Thing I'd like to end on before we can then get to questions that you might have is this quote by Donna Haraway that I'm quite fond of, because I think it should be one of the things that we have at the heart of DFPI, which is a very technology heavy program. And she says, technology is not neutral. We're inside of what we make and it's inside of us. We're living in a world of connections and it matters which ones get made and unmade. And so I think for DFPI, especially that last bit, it matters which ones get made and unmade. That's something that I would like to leave everyone here with before we go to questions. I think we have a responsibility and an opportunity here. So thank you very much. Okay. You're free to turn on your cameras if you would like to, but if you're not in a place where you can, or you feel uncomfortable, leave your camera off. It's completely up to you. Nice to see a few faces, but key thing is, if you've got questions, let us know your questions now in the chat. If you would like to unmute and just ask your question on camera, equally fine. If questions come up later on and you go, I should have asked that in the open day, send me an email. I can always answer a question via email. Always a possibility.
There's a question in the chat, Fiona. Do you? I'll just read it out.
Yes.
The question is, what are some professional areas that students pursue after graduation?
That's a really good question, but it's also a difficult question, because there are some that at this point, we're fairly used to having students, yes, go back into architectural practice, for example, if they come from an architectural background, but because the field of architecture is changing and companies, big and small, have real need for people with the skill sets, not just the tech skill sets, but also the kind of conceptual thinking skill sets that we do on the program. And so that can be a trajectory. But there's also new forms of practice that students go into. So interactive architecture, which might be in the world of installation design. Students go on to work for companies that are really engaged in virtual reality undertakings. So be it gaming companies, be it smaller companies like Mesmerize that are doing new workplaces in virtual reality. Students go on to work in other fields of kind of performance. So we have graduates that do things like the visuals for Metallica last year, for example, that then tour the world based on the students' contribution to actually make these large screen installations that are then the backdrop for Metallica performing. So there's really, really a range. Some people go also into more engineering based things. So some of the projects didn't go into that detail here, but some students, they spend the 15 months really working on some technological question, some tech question that would then really help in industry make new technologies. So it really depends very much on what you would like to achieve, the direction that you have. And it's also something that we can start, talking about on the program together to really see what's your skill set, where would you like to go afterwards, and then identify opportunities. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's also the case that some of the jobs that our students go on to when we're still kind of thinking, where might you go, don't completely exist yet. So there's a range that can happen.
And there's another question in the chat that just says, is the program open to part-time, and are there strong requirements for coding?
Yes.
And
so yes, there is a part-time route. Vanessa, who's on the call with us today, she's a part-time student. So there's different modes of attendance. So yes, there's full-time, which is, as the name suggests, you just take all the modules that are on offer for the 15 months, and then at the end of it, you're done. We have a part-time mode of attendance, which basically means that you double the time that you're on the program. So that would then be 30 months. That's what Vanessa's on. And then there's a flexible mode of attendance, which I think can go up to 4 years. So on a part-time, you basically stretch it out across 2 years. There's ways to do it that are kind of recommended, because if you wanted to do your design work in the first cycle that you're in, then it's recommended, unless you have really strong skills in, let's say, coding already. If you have that, then you might skip that, go straight into design and do skills the following year. But if you really want to actually get into that skills and you haven't done any coding before, do your skills training and then go on to do design, and then maybe you'll do theory the following year. On a flexible mode, you are much more flexible. You can kind of spread it out across 4 years. So, you might just do one module in the first year, and then you go off and you might have a job, you do that. And then for the next academic year, you return and you do your skills module. And then you go off and do your job again. And then you come back, and then finally, it's time for design. So with the flexible mode, you can really design it much, much more the way that suits you. Is there a strong requirement for coding? Well, we have a range of people coming onto the program. Some people are already fairly comfortable with coding in a range of different ways or in one way of coding. I'm not a coder. I think I'm probably at this point the only person on the program who can't code. Jess is the person to talk to when it comes to also all things coding. But our students, they have varying skill sets, and we do teach some coding at the beginning just to kind of get everyone into that space. We also teach a bunch of other technologies, and one of the key things to remember is that the work that we do is not a sole author undertaking. So for the most part, students collaborate, they work in teams, and that's reflective of the industries that you'll go in afterwards, because all the type of work that you see that people out in the world are doing, it really takes a team. And it takes a team not just because there's a lot of work, but because there's so many different aspects. And you, as the person contributing to one bit of it, you don't need to know all of it. So it's good to have an understanding of coding and understand what code can do, maybe on a very superficial level, read some code, so that then when the thing that you're in charge of, you're talking to the person that might be in charge of actually coding up these environments, that you can sensically have a conversation and you're not saying things that make no sense for somebody who then actually has to do the coding. So there is the requirement to kind of, understand the, shall we say, the ecosystem that each project requires to make it actually work, but you don't have to be perfect at all of it. So you learn a basis, a foundation in coding, but not everyone then takes it to that next level. Some people become really, really good at coding, and others have a baseline understanding. And the key thing is to understand that this is a collaborative environment. And we really, really enjoy it when students form successful collaboration groups where people take ownership of one aspect and then work with each other in a dynamic way.
There was a good point that Hannah just made on the chat, and it would be related to the previous comment about what professional areas students do after graduation. And Hannah's just maybe suggested maybe our current students could chip in and have a little say about what they plan to do after they finish their course. We've got a handful of students online today who are in the final stretch of completing their project, so they have a lot on their mind, but obviously, and one of the things that they're probably thinking about too is what do they do afterwards. So would you I mean, could a couple of them maybe jump in and say to our visitors what they're thinking of doing after they finish?
Sure, I can share a bit of mine. During all these periods, I've also been looking for like jobs, like not anything specifically, because the program really opens up like many opportunities and many visions I can see. But now I'm set on beginning my job, which is more business oriented, a little surprisingly, in like mid-year next year. And in the meantime, I guess I'll be more like trialing, exploring, and developing some skills before then.
And also for me, it's like during this program, I found my passion on doing research. So actually, I'm trying to like applying for a PhD or some other academic research position in the future. So yeah.
Cool. There was
starting to answer some questions in the chat. So
yeah, there was a question that Melanie has about architecture backgrounds.
I started writing in the chat. So would you use a lot of Rhino and SketchUp? SketchUp sometimes, but more Rhino. Yes, students do use that. We do teach it at beginners and advanced levels, and but crucially how it might integrate with other platforms. This is something that kind of we're recently making more of a push towards not being so kind of focused just on isolated softwares, but on how they might relate to each other and how you can actually construct pipelines that help and support your work. And Rhino is definitely one that is in there, often then also with Grasshopper, but how they also interface with other things like, for example, gaming engines, how if you're working in one platform, how does that then translate into another platform? And then what would you look for when you in candidate portfolios or during interview? Well, first thing is we're looking for somebody who's keen, who's got an interest, and who is driven to do a program like this. We obviously need to see a portfolio of work, but that can be a huge range because our applicants come from such different backgrounds. So I often get the question in an email, oh, I only have work in, say, X, but you're an architecture school. I haven't done any buildings. I haven't done any of this. It doesn't matter. We want to see creativity. We want to see critical thinking. We want to see work that you've done as an individual, but also if there's work done that you've collaborated on. So that could be your undergraduate work, or you might have a few years industry experience. Show us some of the stuff that you've done in industry. Tell us this. Don't sell something as something that you've done on your own. So, tell us that this was collaborative work done with X company and this was my role in it. So there is no one way of doing a DFPI portfolio. One thing I will say, I've been seeing an awful lot of portfolios that have a very strange format, like this really skinny landscape format that are not screen friendly. Just go for a conventional, screen size thing that is easily accessible on a screen. But in terms of content, there are no specific requirements other than kind of giving us a good overview of you as a designer, as a critical thinker, or as a theoretician, if that's something that you're coming out of, and then express the kind of ideas that you would like to pursue. Sometimes we have portfolios where students put hand sketches just to show, the kind of media that they're using. So don't be shy to kind of go, oh, is a hand sketch all right? I like sitting in a public space and sketching the world around me. That can say an awful lot about you as a critical and creative thinker. So do include this if it's something that you feel is appropriate.
There's a question in the chat asking about physical tech and digital tech, and the answer to that is that it's equal parts, I would say, as in terms of what the support that the program offers is very much equally weighted. But then some students may take on more physical work, and then other students may take on more digital work. It's also not so strict in its definition, because we have amazing workshop facilities where you can, like a traditional workshop as well as a digital fabrication workshop, where we can build things at prototype scales, but also at full scales if you want to go into that direction. And in terms of digital, it's not just the further question was like Unreal, 3D modeling, etc. It's not just that, it's also physical computation, where you are looking at like at small scale electronics and its integration into bigger things. So it's very much all of these things are supported, and how much you take on is very much based on the individual student's interests. But definitely early on, and also as your project develops, that support is available there to you.
And one thing to also say is that there's a lot of talk about technology on this program, but not all students actually then build things with the technologies that they're interested in. There have also been pieces where students critique these technologies, interrogate them, but they don't actually build them. A few years ago, we had a project called Neotech, which was looking at kind of the future of wearables, and wearables in the context where they would also become implanted into the human body. And the project was presented as a speculative film. So there was a script written, actors hired, and then there was a story told around what might happen if these technologies really took over. The student didn't code up anything. The student didn't build this technology. The student made a little prop that we pretended could do all these things. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you can build yet. I mean, Elon Musk has his ambitions of Neuralink and all of this, but we're not quite there yet. And also that's another conversation. But, it was a little plastic device. And then there was a mock-up for an app on a phone. None of this actually worked in that you could use it, but there was a world created, a speculative world, where viewers to the movie bought into it, that this works. It was kind of Black Mirror-like. So you don't have to become, if you're interested in the technologies, but not really in actually making them, but critically engaging with them, that's also possible. We also have had, not that often, we've had projects this year, one, for example, where the end result was actually something that didn't have any of these kind of digital or physical technologies. Yes, in the making of it, there was a kind of a chair constructed. So the student went into the workshop and used technologies like, kind of welding stations. There was weaving. So you need certain types of analog technologies to do weaving. But there was an object made at the end that then was used as kind of a central piece in a performance, and a dancer came in and engaged with this, and there's a whole kind of, you know, critical world around it, but there wasn't any kind of, you know, interactive technology used in this project. And that's equally possible, you know, where we don't insist on that. It's you're fairly free to also define your own path in this. We've got students that stick to architecture quite closely. We've just had a project this last year that was looking at deconstructivist architecture and kind of performance and drama in ways that are really interesting, and kind of think about new types of stages. There was the question about stages, stage design in the chat. So yes, stage design definitely something that you can do. But also challenging, you know, what is a contemporary stage? Where is it? You know, is it in public space? Is it in virtual space? Is it something that takes place in a theatre on what we, you know, kind of have as a proscenium stage? So all of this definitely possible. Again, take ownership of what you're interested in, and it's our job to then kind of facilitate and support that, and see what you'd like to make on this program. Answered that one. Are there any other questions that we've overlooked? I don't think so. There's one. How many students are on this course? What's the class size? Well, that depends. It's a range. So every year we have people that then are kind of successful in their application, between 40 and 50, roughly. And so it's a bit unpredictable. You know, this year, kind of, I think this incoming cohort, we've got about 45 or 46. So, you know, it's good class size. You know, you'll have quite a lot.
That's the overall class size, though.
Yes.
Like you don't have tutorials with
No.
a group of everyone.
No. So you're in a tutor group. And so in term one, when there's still more kind of class-based activity, so where you might have a theory lecture with a seminar, we all meet together and, you know, have conversations, but then we do break up into smaller discussion groups. Similarly for skills, you know, the groups are a bit larger, but we do break students up into kind of two groups, often kind of around the kind of more beginner, more advanced in terms of what's being taught. But then when we get to design, your team is smaller, so 2 to 3 students. And then the tutor group that you're in is, you know, depending on how many students there are that year, it's kind of roughly a third in each tutor group. But importantly, and that's something that I think for the future and ambition also is to kind of, you know, really integrate the tutor groups a little bit more. I think that, I mean, the students we've got on the call today have come from 2 different tutor groups, but I think you've all interacted with each other quite a bit over the course of it. So you don't go into just kind of one siloed studio, which often in other architecture school we've observed is that, you know, you're in this studio and that's where your friends are, and there's not a huge amount of interaction with others in other groups. We have an open space studio, and I think students, certainly in their kind of social undertakings, but also in the events that we run, field trips, exhibitions, we kind of go for the whole cohort, and people do interact with each other and not just within their studio groups. Okay. Doesn't look like there are any more questions, but as I said, if there are more questions, sometimes, you know, you're in a session like this and then afterwards you go, I should have asked this one question and I forgot. It's not too late. Send me an email. Always answer questions via email. On the DFPI page, if you scroll down, the Bartlett School of Architecture Design for Performance Interaction page, scroll down, my contact details are there. Just send me an email and then I can respond to that. If you've got something that's you've only just realized, it's something that maybe you don't feel comfortable putting in the chat right now, or it's a specific question that might need a bit of a longer answer.
I think also if you are in London, please come to the show. It'll be held in, there's several events. So there's a show in Gordon Street, which is the main Bartlett campus, but also there's one in here East. Fiona will have the Fiona will have the exact dates.
Yeah, it's on the 15th of December at here East, starting at 3 p.m. Students are going to be showing their prototypes that they've built. There's going to be, you know, social interaction just before Christmas, hopefully a nice event as well. You can book via Eventbrite. So if you go to the Bartlett School of Architecture page and the 15 show 2023, there's then the kind of program specific events, and that will take you through to an Eventbrite link. So book in there, and then, you know, bring friends, bring people that might be interested. That's an open house. And the graduation show at 22 Gordon Street on the Bloomsbury campus, that will be open, I think, to the public from the 9th, I believe, 9th of December. You don't need to book in for that, so just come and see the work that the students have presented, and then come to the project fair on the 15th. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Natalie just put it in the chat, so click on that and then see and share it with people who might be interested. Great. So I think we're right on the hour. And thanks everyone for coming. Be in touch if you've got questions. And hope you all have a good rest of your day, and look forward to hearing from you and meeting you at some point.
Thank you, everyone. And
Okay,
thank you to our
thank you.
students.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. Really great.
Yeah.
And yeah, and have a good Christmas, everyone. Bye.